Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to the General Eclectic podcast with Rod Dreer. I'm your host, Kale Zeldin, and we do have Rod back with us today. Hello, Rod. I wanted to take a minute to thank Emil Doak for filling in handily. Stepping into your shoes last week was your travel plans were pretty jam-packed. We'll get into that in just a minute. But anyway, welcome wherever and whenever you are. Today is the 22nd of June. June month here is rapidly coming to a close, and maybe you and I could talk about the phenomena of June here in just a little bit. But Rod, you've been traveling all over the place, and my gosh, what's up, brother?
Yeah, I was in Spain last week. I'm so grateful that my colleague Emil filled in for me, and so our listeners could see two people with proper haircuts for once. Actually talking. But no, here I am. I was last week in Spain doing promotions for Vivir sin Mentiras, or Live Not by Lies in Spanish. And I went to Madrid, to Valencia, to Barcelona, and it was a great time. But it was so interesting to me to meet people there who were refugees from Venezuela.
That's interesting.
Is under socialist dictatorship, and
so anyway, just so people know, Spain was apparently one of the places where Venezuelans fled their own country to sort of set up shop. Is that how you appreciate it?
That's right. Yeah. And there were two people, both women, who didn't know each other. That one was in Madrid, one was in Valencia. And they were both emphatic that the experience they're having in Spain, trying to warn Spaniards that the sort of thing that destroyed their country seems to be coming to Spain. Spaniards don't take them seriously. They said this is exactly what these people who were from the Soviet bloc who were trying to tell Americans to be concerned, said, we have the same experience. Nobody wants to believe us that it can't happen here. But that was really sobering, because I had just not thought of that, of the Venezuelans.
I actually hadn't either, but I find it interesting too, because you're sort of, remember this trip to Spain that you took was fresh off the heels of your trip to Romania. And honestly, from your descriptions of your trip to Romania, it sounded like it was an incredible reception. I mean, how was the juxtaposition between that reception in Romania and the reception and the kind of conversations that you were able to have with people in Spain?
Yeah, well, the Romanian reception was far, far more enthusiastic. But to be fair, in Spain, the COVID restrictions are much stricter right now than they are in Romania. So we couldn't have, for example, the sort of public meetings that we had when I was there for the Benedict option. But I hope, I did a lot of interviews, and I hope that the book does catch on. It was remarkable. When I was in Madrid, I had a meeting with a man named Ivan Espinosa, who is the number 2 in the Vox Party. The Vox Party is always described in the American media as
far-right party.
Far-right. Well, I looked at their platform, and they're basically moderate Republicans by American standards. But they're very strong against immigration to the country, and they have good reason to be. But anyway, they're considered by the Spanish press to be basically fascist, which is just completely absurd. But I had a drink with Ivan Espinosa, and he's a businessman. He may be about 50 years old, incredibly well-spoken. He speaks perfect English without an accent. He did some his graduate work in America. But
got it.
Anyway, I said, why did you get involved in politics? You're not a career politician. He said, honestly, it happened 5 or 6 years ago when I got so sick of the fact that the PP, which is the initials for the mainstream conservatives, and they weren't doing anything, that the left would do this crazy stuff and they wouldn't resist it. And the PP, in fact, and these are like the establishment conservative party, they went along with all this crazy gender ideology stuff that the left pushed. And
so
Vox is...
do you see analogs with the Republican Party in our own country?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. The Vox would have been the analog to the sort of Trump populist resurgence. The difference being that the Vox people are really serious and and they're very disciplined. But here's the thing: the working class votes for Vox. That the people who normally would have the parties that would have spoken for the working class, the Socialist and the Reformed Communist Party, they're really now the party of university lecturers and students and things like that. And so, but I really enjoyed talking with him, and it was yet another reminder about how completely phony the discourse and misleading the discourse is in the American media about right of center politics in Europe. I mean, I was talking just today on Signal with a friend of mine in Washington who's involved in the national security establishment, and he said that here, even in America, he's talking about even among the right, they're completely convinced that Viktor Orban is a fascist, and that's all they want to know. And I told him, I said, this is so far from the truth. You have to just spend 1 week in this country and you'll know it's not like that at all. But he said they have this fixed idea, and it's the same with Fox.
We've talked about this, gosh, early on, maybe episodes.
I'm still here. Hold on.
That's fine.
I'm sitting here in my friend's office, and I've got to turn the AC down here. Ooh. These people, Kale, these people in Hungary, they don't know from air conditioning. They're like, oh, it's so cold in here. And I'm like, you're kidding.
Perfect.
I was just in a restaurant having lunch. It's a little hummus place.
Yeah.
And I said, she brought me a bottle of Coke Zero. I said, this Coke Zero is warm. Can I have a glass of ice? She said, we have no ice.
Yeah, of course.
No, it's like, just pray. I'm just telling you this so you can pray for her.
Yes, we Southerners have a hard time traveling in Europe because they're deeply suspect of both air conditioning and ice. And honestly, can you imagine? Well, you still live in Louisiana, or you've returned to Louisiana, as everybody knows. Like, can you imagine living in Louisiana without air conditioner or ice? It's just impossible. Like, I can't even fathom it.
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to have gotten us off track there, but air conditioning is important. And here today, and it's going to be like 96 degrees. Yeah. People are freaking out. I'm like, sure. Oh, this is. I told my friend this morning, we were having coffee. I said, guess what? It's like this almost every day for 3 months in Louisiana.
Come on, man. It's more like 4 or 5 months. Stop it with this 3-month business. We all know that it's hot as the third circle of hell for. It just seems like forever. Anyway, I'm
the Vox Party and the far right.
Yeah, I'm struck by the. This is not the first time you and I have sort of stumbled upon this, but a couple of things strike me is that we have talked about the sort of the cathedral, mm-hmm. right? As the sort of the stand-in for the narrative, right? The sort of the high end. Academic and media establishment. And they really seem to have a stranglehold on the narrative, so much so that you, a conservative from America, have the exact same misapprehension of what Orban is and represents as a conservative in Spain. And I would imagine that this sort of plays its way out in all the various countries in Europe about Orban. I mean, it's a remarkable narrative conformity that not only is it remarkable because it's a conformist narrative, but it's also remarkable because it seems to be false.
Yeah, it's totally false. And look, Orban is a statesman. He's a politician. He's not a saint. There's plenty of reasons to criticize him, but I think it just strikes me as how dishonest the criticism is. I mean, criticize him for who he is, not this caricature.
Right.
And and the whole thing. I mean, we talked about this on previous podcasts, but Kale, I got to tell you that this experience over here has dramatically undermined my already shaky confidence in our media, simply to tell us the truth. Mm-hmm. So, there are far right people over here. My son Matt is here with me this summer, and he sent me a picture yesterday he took of an old man on the street wearing a T-shirt that had a Nazi occult sign on it, something that Himmler invented. The picture of this old dude is like, he's got a pot belly. It looks like he's maybe 58 and he's wearing shorts. Sure. And you would just think it was the sun, but Matt studies the far right. He said, no, this is. And so look, there are people here like that, and we need to talk about it. But if you can't tell the difference between a center-right politician like Viktor Orban and people like the dude wearing the Nazi shirt.
Yeah.
How useful is your analysis? And what's interesting too, Kale, and this is where I think why both the Vox Party in Spain and Fidesz here in Hungary and the Law and Justice Party in Poland get so slammed by our media. It's because the things they're conservative on are immigration and LGBT.
Right.
And these are things that hugely matter to liberals in the US and Western Europe. Over the weekend, I had coffee with a Hungarian friend of mine who had lived a large part of his childhood in America because his parents are academics.
Okay.
And he said, we were talking about this, about how Orban and Hungary are distorted in American discourse, public discourse. And he said, after the 2008 financial crash, in the aftermath of that, he said that the Orban government passed a law forbidding banks from expelling people who had defaulted on their loans from their homes. He protected them.
Okay.
My friend said, did Barack Obama do that? No, he didn't. So this so-called fascist Orban government did. I guess the point simply is that that it just doesn't track, that this whole he's a far right person comes from two things, immigration and LGBT.
Yeah, it's but to me, obviously you know a heck of a lot more. You're on the ground there in Hungary, and I'm just not, and so I'm not going to waste anyone's time offering some sort of crappy analysis about what you're watching and seeing.
Let the crappy analysis come from the guy.
I'll leave it to you. Yeah, I'll leave it to you. But I am struck, from a media standpoint, from a sort of a legacy media standpoint, from a cathedral narrative standpoint. I was listening to a podcast the other day between, it was on Jordan Peterson's channel, and he was interviewing Barry Weiss. And it really was a great conversation. It was probably over 2 hours long. It was, and I like those long conversations, and I, listen to them when I do my errands and pick up my kids from all the various things that they're doing over the summer and whatnot. But at any rate, they were both really lamenting the loss of, he was really interested in why Barry Weiss left the New York Times. And so I thought he did a really good job of kind of teasing that story out and really kind of getting into the meaning of it all. As he's a great interview, and he really does, my favorite mode of his is he goes into sort of his psychologist mode, where he's really asking people real questions and asking them why they're using the words they're using and those sorts of things. But at any rate, the larger point of it is that they were both lamenting that, here she was, and I'm sure our audience knows who Barry Weiss is. Actually, she brought up you in that interview positively in terms of Live Not by Lies. But, she famously left the New York Times because it was a den of intolerance and nastiness, and basically the woke wing made it impossible for her to do her job, and effectively scaring the editors and the adults in the room and all of that. But they were both really lamenting, like, what does it mean for her, to achieve what I'm sure you would agree as a journalist yourself, the pinnacle of world, it's world-class institution like the New York Times. What does it mean that the world-class, the gold standard, if you will, the gold standard of journalism is not what it says it is? So much so that she, who was hired, she reminded us of this, and I had forgotten about this. She had been hired from the Wall Street Journal to the New York Times as a kind of, I guess what we would I would jokingly call a diversity hire. But because there was this strange moment in the immediate aftermath of Trump's victory in 2016, or was it 2015 when he actually won the election, and he takes office in 2016, I believe.
2016, he won the election, took office in 2017.
Okay, sorry, yeah. And there was this strange moment in which the New York Times was actually asking, like, wow, we really missed this thing. We need to hire somebody on the editorial side of things to bring in voices that we have been overlooking. And so that was Barry's job. Right. And she enjoyed that part of her job, but basically they very quickly sort of closed ranks and made it impossible for her to do her job. Mm-hmm. But she and Peterson were really deeply distraught over the fact that this institution, this major institution like the New York Times, is totally corrupted. And again, you and I have been over this territory a bunch. People know where we come from on this standpoint. But I was very much struck by the real sadness that both Peterson and Weiss had about the loss of it, because as he asks the question, like, well, then, how do you answer the question, where do you go to get the truth? And she's like,
Yeah,
there is
exactly.
nowhere. So she herself, and you and I have talked about this too, is like, look, Substack has been great for her. She's doing fantastic. She's, all this sort of stuff, but there's no proper institution with which she said like a dentist or a doctor can go to sort of figure out what's actually happening. And so I'm fascinated by your continuing reportage about Orban, et cetera. Again, not because you're trying to sort of carry water for Orban per se, but rather that we are not getting the truth.
No, we're not getting the truth. And this stuff really matters. I mean, Europe faces a massive, massive problem with Islam. And we've known this for a while, but it sort of faded from the American consciousness, I think, as we've gotten farther and farther from 9/11. But it's still here. And I've been having a number of conversations with Europeans from all over the continent who are like really worried about this. And of course, the cathedral, as you say, suppresses this information. In Sweden right now, Sweden is undergoing a crime wave, and it's 99% Islamic immigrants.
Wow.
But the media won't talk about that for obvious reasons. In a similar way, this just occurred to me. I saw that as you and I are talking, that Lori Lightfoot, the progressive Black mayor of Chicago, a city that's undergoing just massacres in the streets, violent crime.
Literally.
Yeah, literally. She just said that declared racism as a public health emergency and took $10 million that had been given by the feds to fight COVID, now to fight racism. And
so I got a story to tell you about that. So I have a good friend of mine works in sort of high positions, and I'll be vague for reasons, but trust me, he's a very, very, very successful man, and he lives right off of Michigan Avenue in one of those high-rise condos, right on Lake Michigan. And he actually they left the city. They still have their large condo down in downtown Chicago, but they live they have a place down south in the state, and they left. And I ran into him this past weekend, and I'm like, oh, so, are you anxious to get back to the city? And they were city folks. They loved it. They lived in the middle of town, the whole thing. And they looked at me, both of them, he and his wife, just like, no, we're not. And I'm like, wait, really? Like, he's like, no, we're not going back. Like, we're not going back. He said they had to go back to check on the condo the other day. And it was a Saturday morning, and he was walking his dog. He's got one of his little dogs, and he's walking the dog at like 5 o'clock in the morning. He's an early riser, and he's walking down Michigan Avenue. And even at 5 o'clock in the morning, it's in a city like Chicago, it's pretty deserted on a Saturday morning. And he said there was this large Suburban filled with people, and the windows are down, and they're like just driving down Michigan Avenue, doing donuts and doing all these kind of crazy things with zero sense that they were going to get pulled over or harassed or do anything. He said Kale, it was like out of a scene, out of like Iraq, in the aftermath of the war. And you just had this gunship driving around down a deserted downtown and he just said, Kale, there was zero sense that there were going to be any repercussions for their, whatever their behavior.
Yeah. Well, do you remember broken windows theory?
Go ahead. I don't
yeah, no, it was something that came out in I think James Q. Wilson, the criminologist and sociologist, came up with it. I believe that's correct. It was something from the 1990s where he had this theory that if broken windows on a block signal to others, to criminals, that disorder reigns here, that this is not a place where people care about order. And so it incentivizes crime by sending this psychological signal. Mm-hmm. This was the theory behind when Rudy Giuliani took over in New York.
Right.
they were going to start cracking down on small crimes, broken windows crimes, as a way of restoring a sense of order. Like, we will not let the jungle take over here. We will keep things. Well, just last week I was looking, and this is still an ongoing story in the New York Times, about the crime wave in New York City, and Washington Square Park, which is the heart of Lower Manhattan. Just of Greenwich Village. It's beautiful center of Greenwich Village with the arch there. It has become a disaster area. They have 1,000 people there at night, shooting up drugs, getting drunk, fighting, and all that. The Times did a story saying that the people who live in that neighborhood, this is a really nice neighborhood, are scared to death to go out. And the Times had this perfect line. They said, the reporter said that people there are afraid to speak out because they're afraid of not sounding progressive.
Wow.
I'm like,
wow. Yeah. That's going to break, though, right? I mean, at a certain point, right, it has to break.
Does it?
Okay.
I mean,
why not?
No. I think so. But let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
I mean, when my wife and I moved to Manhattan in 1998,
glory years. I mean, seriously, in every way, in every way.
No, we had so many people say to us, we had so many conversations that would start out like this. Look, I'm a liberal, but thank God for Rudy Giuliani, because this city is so much better than it was. I mean, and it was a great city. We didn't know what it was like before, but people kept saying over and over, can you believe all the good things that have happened to this city? We were there from 98 to 2003. It was wonderful. I mean, just really wonderful.
Well, my first visit to New York City was in 1989. And, I've cousins in the city and whatnot. And then I went on a school trip, and they basically told us said, this was sort of like the years of, that sort of Spike Lee do the right thing era. And it was a nasty time in the city. And it had been long standing, of course, by that point, but it was dangerous, like legitimately dangerous. You don't walk alone. You don't make eye contact with people. Now, they might've just been telling that because we were sort of stupid high school kids from the South on a trip to the big city, but it was absolutely a mess. It was dirty. It was grungy. It was a scary, it was a dangerous place. But by the time you all got there in 98, it was not that at all.
Oh, it was great. And I remember thinking back then, wow, this is so great. The people of New York have learned their lesson.
That's right.
They're never going to let this go back, revert
to history, right? Yes, yeah.
And now, but here's the difference. Now the internet exists. And now people don't have to live in the city in order to do their work. And and they can't really hold that over New Yorkers and the people who would be scared to live there, who would want to move out. Well, you can't hold over their heads that you have to live here to work, because everybody for the last year, a whole lot of people have been working remotely. And so,
so that's interesting you say that. I was talking to a finance guy the other day. It was a golf scholarship tournament here at the school, and he was saying, again, he's a finance guy, and they hire these guys, right out of college, and they mentor them. And he said, so they've all gone remote, and they can't get them back into the office. He said he can't get his young guys back into the office. And finally, they had to say, you have to come back into the office. Now, he said that there'll probably be some kind of compromise, that they'll be able to do sort of like 2 days in the office, 3 days out, that sort of thing. But he was worried because he said, look, tons of the stuff they can do online, like they can, like that's for sure. But he said so much of those soft skills, soft stuff, the stuff that you learn working shoulder to shoulder, like literally shoulder to shoulder with people, is he's worried that that's going to all go away. But to hear you talk about the cities, and if we telescope this out and we think about San Francisco and New York and Boston and Washington, D.C. and Chicago, these major places that are very expensive to live, but you're very much compensated for living there. what is going to happen to those city centers? Look, the rich people will find a way to stay rich, right? We know that. I'm certainly not worried about the rich people. They're going to be fine. But I'm worried about the cities themselves. Are we going to have a reversal back to the late 70s and the entirety of the 80s and into the 90s, repeat of urban hell?
Well, yeah, and I think that a thing that is extremely difficult to talk about, but I think that's going to be in a lot of people's minds, is the racial aspect of all this. Like the ones who are causing the violence and all that in Washington Square Park. Just to look at the pictures, they're mostly Black people and Latinos from the Bronx who are coming down there. And there was saw a video of a Black guy saying, like, this is my right to be down here. How dare anybody tell me I can't be down here? And of course he's correct, that you have a right to be there. But the fact that maybe not this guy, but that so many of those people are raising hell there in the park and making it unlivable and violent, and parents are having to pick up drug needles from there. This is the thing that people are thinking about. And when I was in Paris, I mean, people were talking about leaving the city. Just this morning here in Budapest, I was talking with the Hungarian guy who said that, he has a couple of colleagues who both came here from Paris. They had the money to do it because they work remotely, but they said that they're just too scared to be in Paris now. And this is about Islamic and immigrant gangs. And they say that Budapest is a safe city, and they feel like what Budapest is today, they used to have that same feeling in Paris. Well, look, Budapest is not Paris. Nowhere else is Paris. But these people said just for peace of mind, they had to get out of Paris.
Well, it feels like we're losing our ability that we have learned over, the history of mankind, right? History of humankind. We seem to be in this sort of strange moment where we're losing our ability. We're forgetting how to live with one another. If you look at like what a city is for, you and I like to talk about this. This is some, at least me, I don't know about you, but I like to talk about, it's always important to remember what the thing is for. What is it ordered toward? What is the end, the goal, the telos of a thing? And, what are cities for? And of course, you and I are both huge Dante fans. You wrote a book on it, for God's sakes. Dante, so vital to Dante's vision of the cosmology, so vital to that vision is the properly ordered city, riffing, of course, on the idea that we are promised, in terms of Christian eschatology, a new Jerusalem, right? Not a new Garden of Eden. And so that the city always becomes an icon for pointing toward, in its best instantiation, pointing toward our telos. And our telos is communal. It is somehow learning how to live in concert with one another in some sort of harmonious fashion. And I fear, even though I don't live in an urban setting, I live in a park essentially because I live and work at the school here. I'm concerned that we've lost something really, really vital in terms of how to live in community, or how to live in a polis, how to be political. And I'm reminded, I'll say one more thing and I'll let you jump in here. So I know I'm talking too much here, but I'm struck by the line in a documentary about Brett Weinstein and Heather Hying in the aftermath of the Evergreen State College meltdown. And there's a great documentary, a 3-part documentary by Mike Nana, and you'll see the link below in the show notes here, where Weinstein says something. What we're seeing here is a breakdown in the logic of civilization. And I just keep going back to that, Rod. I mean, I really see this, and look, I know that there are always these ebbs and flows, right? But this is why I get really concerned about an overly simplistic progressive narrative that the arc of history bends toward justice and all that kind of stuff. I just don't believe it. Yeah. Right? I believe that civilization is at stake every day. And so what we're seeing right now, you're seeing it in Europe, you're seeing it in the cities here in America, you're seeing it in communities and in colleges and in small towns is that we don't seem to have a vocabulary with which we can negotiate and live together.
Well, Michel Houellebecq, the French novelist, in his novel Submission, probably his most famous novel, it posits a future France in which the French, the godless French, or bourgeois French, are completely exhausted, morally and otherwise. And they're desperate for some governing ethos, not just a political ethos, but a religious ethos. And Houellebecq is not a believer, but he's a big follower of Auguste Comte.
Is he really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, he is. And Comte believed, and Comte was not any sort of Christian, but he did believe that all societies needed something like a religion to keep it together, and that eventually something would rush in to fill the vacuum. Well, for Houellebecq, he in the novel, he says that is going to be Islam. Now, this is not what he hopes for, but I mean, in fact, the triumph of Islam in that book, at the end of the book, it's not this glorious thing. It's just sort of like the French just do the Gallic shrug and accept Islam because nobody has a better idea.
Right.
Well, and I think that is definitely what wokeness is about right now. And I don't know if wokeness is going to take on the aspects of a more completely totalitarian ideology, or if there'll be something else. But I know, as you say, there will be something, because people cannot live in disorder forever.
Right.
And
we are fundamentally religious, right? And I'm saying that with a small r. We are religious. So the question, this is something that Tom Holland talks about, of course. I feel like this is a Tom Holland Stan account. That you have sort of two types of people in the world: those who those people who are religious and admit it and are conscious of it and understand that, and those who are religious and do not admit it and do not understand that.
Yeah. Well, just this week on my blog, I published a long email from a reader who is a conservative, and he's Asian American. He said that he was pointing to me to the rise of white power, white supremacy. Among some people, and he was saying that he believes, I don't have it in front of me, but something to the effect of he believes that this is inevitable. If we're going, you can't expect there to be to talk about all this rhetoric from the left about how white people are pathological and where whiteness is evil, blah blah blah. That kind of talk inevitably calls up an equal and opposite reaction from the whites.
Did you see on Sunday the Washington Post, their lead article, lead story, and it was a lead video as well on whiteness? Did you see this?
Oh God, no!
You've got to see it. So the link is below here in the show notes.
Okay.
The link is here below in the show notes. But basically, you got to see it. It's about a 5.5-minute video, and it is basically telling white people that they need to form white groups. So sort of accountability groups, and sort of really sort of struggle through their whiteness. I mean, this is just straight out of Mao. I mean, this is really amazing stuff. Of course, done by the Washington Post with zero irony, like with zero sense that maybe there are some historical antecedents that we might want to become conscious of and avoid. Because as you have pointed out on numerous occasions, like you do not want to invoke, call upon these dark devils of white identity politics. Like
absolutely not.
You and I grew up in a world in the immediate aftermath, right? I mean, I think you talk about this so eloquently in your blog. I mean, like you come out of a world where you knew people who had participated in their youth, to be fair, sort of, but in white identity politics, and it's
in the Klan,
and right, that's what I mean. White identity politics in the Klan, like that, you do not want the majority of the people in this country to start centering their whiteness. It is insane that they want to do this, Rod.
Yeah, it is insane. And
look, and to be blunt, as a Christian, as a Catholic, it's a sin, right? I mean, I feel we have to sort of say that out loud. Like, this is not good, people.
Sure. That's exactly right. And it's, you're talking about how we're forgetting how to live together in a civilization. people are so stupid. They don't see how thin the skin over the skull is, you know?
That's right.
And
I love that.
it is within living memory in the place, the state where you and I come from, where Black people were lynched. You know, it seems so far away because you and I were raised after that era was over. And I remember thinking, God, how could that have ever happened? Most people, my generation, white people, think, how did that really happen?
That's right.
But when you get older and you realize how close in history it was, and then you get a little broader perspective on how quickly good people can turn on each other because they get in touch with these atavistic tribal sensations or passions, and it could go so bad. This thing we have, we call Western civilization, it was the peace we have now, the order was purchased at the cost of a lot of blood and tears.
Amen.
You know, tears of blood and tears of Black people, white people, all kinds of people. It is a precious gift, and we're just throwing it away. Throwing it away.
We forget that at our peril. I mean, genuinely, and I know you and I both come from the same place on this, and I think I have a deep respect for the forces of civilization that keep at bay our most base instincts. I mean, look, you know, Freud knew this, right? You know, we've talked about this before. You know, Freud understood that there's a very thin little gauzy sheet over our most base instincts, and if we forsake civilization, you know, you do not want to unleash these forces. And again, I don't say this as some sort of like threat. Like, I don't want this either. You know, like, I believe in civilization. I believe in manners. I believe in, you know, we used to have this kind of language, like to be civilized meant not to be feral, not to be wild, not to be lawless, right? And we need these things in order to not kill each other. And I don't want to sound too, well, yeah, you know, I know it might sound a little bit sort of overheated rhetoric here, but like, it's real.
No, and it's really happening. I was in the Spanish city of Valencia on the Mediterranean.
Yes, Spain. Hello, Spain. Right.
Yeah. Well, I was, you know, Valencia was founded by the Romans. Its name back then was Valentia, Valentia, when it was a Roman founding. Well, I went into the cathedral there and saw a relic of Saint Vincent, the proto-martyr of Spain, which is to say he was the first Christian martyred in Spain. You can see his hand and his forearm. It's there in a reliquary behind the bars. And because they have it, the story of Vincent, he was a deacon in the city of Saragossa. He was brought in the persecution of Diocletian. He was brought before the Roman governor of Valencia, Dacian, who tried to get him to burn a copy of the Bible. He said, I wouldn't do it. He was tortured horribly, absolutely horribly, and then killed. But his followers recovered his body, and there is his arm there. So this is an incredible testimony. This happened in the year 304. So this is like 1700 years ago. And there it is right there, this connection to the early church or the Roman times. So if you walk just a few feet to the side of where St. Vincent's relic is, you see a portrait, a painting of the people of that parish who died as martyrs in the Spanish Civil War. They have not been canonized as far as I know, but they were actual faces. And you can see that there's a little chart there to identify them. Men and women known to the people of that parish who were murdered in the Spanish Civil War for their faith. The Spanish Civil War went between 35 or 36 and 1939. So this is basically yesterday. And already the passions are still there in Spain. And so, you know, you can look back from the Roman era to modern times. There's the capacity to do horrible violence, for people to murder their neighbors, to murder peaceful people around them for the sake of politics. It's there, and we are getting, I fear, perilously close in the United States and in Europe, Western Europe, to that sort of thing. I was telling this one person in Spain, I said, yeah, you know, this Venezuelan I talked to said that you guys are really in trouble here, and you don't see it. This guy said to me, well, no, of course we're not. What happened to Venezuela is not going to happen to us. We're part of the European Union. I was like, dude, do you think that's going to stop this, if these passions cut loose in this country or any country.
Well, what's remarkable to me about that is, Europe. I mean, you and I are both Europhiles in our various capacities and all of that, but Europe is steeped in conflict and in blood. Like it is, even in his own country, right there. Like you're talking to him in the square where these people were murdered for their beliefs, martyred for their beliefs. How can you be so disconnected from history? And I'm always concerned, that this is why, again, I'll say it again, I get very nervous when people have this sort of triumphant progressive vision that we're getting better and better, and all of, I remember President Obama's, soaring rhetoric about the arc of history, and it feels really good. It felt really good to hear him say those kind of things, and it was aspirational, but it is so naive. And let's just be blunt, it's a lie. It's not true.
Yeah, no, it's
History
not true.
doesn't end, and we need to really respect that. That we really need to respect that learning how to live with one another. We have the memory of it. We have the embedded wisdom in our literature and in our stories, but we cut ourselves off from that, right? We cut ourselves off from the wellspring of wisdom at our peril. And this is something that I try to teach my students all the time. Like, where will we go for wisdom? Do not think that you do not need wisdom. Just because you've got an iPhone does not mean you don't need wisdom.
The problem go ahead, I'm sorry. No, the problem with wisdom from the modern point of view is it tells you in some way, shape, or form, thou shalt not. And nobody wants to hear that.
It's a limiting principle.
Right.
Yeah,
it's a limit.
That's right.
It's a limit, and this is here in Hungary, famously over the last a week or so, the government passed a law, signed into law, prohibiting the broadcast or distribution of pro-LGBT materials to minors. And this was reported in the West. Surprise, as like, well, you can't even speak of LGBT in Hungary. That's a lie. It's not true. The law is very limited to stuff aimed at children. And one of the things the government explained was, look, children should be able to have a childhood. They should not be hit with gender ideology when they're kids. And they pointed out that, in England, we've had a 4,000% increase in girls in the past few years. 4,400. 4,400%
increase.
And that's not normal.
And we should say increase in girls submitting themselves for reassignment procedures from a transsexual standpoint.
And so what the Hungarians are trying to do is to protect their own children and protect their own future. But the only way that liberals in Western Europe and the US can see this is bigotry. They are a country that still wants to believe in the wisdom that has come down to them, not only through the Christian faith, but just through the experience of humanity. And they say that we've got to stop this propaganda from coming to our children, because they don't believe that liberalism is a suicide pact. And thank goodness.
Well, and this is where liberalism has no answer to capitalism, right? If you recall, like both you and I grew up in the 70s and into the 80s, and if you recall Saturday morning cartoons, we did not, the networks refused to allow advertising during cartoons. Why would they have done such a thing, Rod? Why would they have forbidden advertising to kids during Saturday morning cartoons? Well, they knew that the whole advertising game is basically destructive, and it's certainly destructive from a developmental standpoint. And the fact that we can't understand that there's a difference between a 10-year-old and a 20-year-old is a shocking failure of our civilization.
Yeah, but the thing is, these LGBT child advocates, they know perfectly well that if they undermine the kid's sense of stability, gender stability and self, that they're likely to get more transgender or gender fluid kids. But what they're doing is they're preying on children who are still developing,
Of course.
and screwing with their heads. And the Hungarian government, in its wisdom, is one of the only ones who seems to understand this and to take action against this sort of thing. Meanwhile, I just learned a couple nights ago that Disney has queered Kermit the Frog, and they're putting Kermit and the drag queen, the same drag queen who did the Blues Clues Pride Parade. They're co-hosting a special, an LGBT Pride special for kids. And
is this as culmination of all the June festivities, or what?
Yeah. I mean, it's like who is the more morally sane civilization or society, Hungarian society or America right now?
But this goes back, Rod. This goes back to what we said several episodes back. Is that the sort of the default ideology suggests that we are our bodies don't mean anything. Right, that we are some sort of, I sort of jokingly said a meat robot or even meat Legos, right? That infinitely malleable, infinitely plastic, it doesn't really matter. It's like what you feel on the inside of the expressive self. It's like, well, no, actually, my body means something, right? And it projects, it's an icon of the divine, both as a sign outward and as a sign inward from the sacred order. And we just pretend like none of this matters. We just pretend that these are just mere accidents, meat accidents. It's gross. It's gross.
Yeah, because if the body is any kind of limitation, then it means that we can't do, our will is not free.
That's right. That's right.
And we're willing to watch the destruction of our civilization for the sake of freeing the will. We will rule in hell.
Well, in other words, we don't believe in civilization. We don't believe in culture. We don't believe in telos. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. It's a deep, deep nihilism.
Do you realize how depressing we are? We've gotten to but it's true. It's true.
But
it's true.
I know. I know. We do this, but I just, I mean, in part, I want to have these conversations because I want people to sort of recognize, this sort of pit in their stomach that they might be feeling when they watch all this stuff unfold. That it does matter, that the point of all this is not to sort of become privatized and to sort of turn into the self. I mean, we have to build ourselves up for sure, but this stuff has deep consequence for your communities. And I think that, I had a lengthy conversation just this past weekend with someone from a town several hours away, and she was deeply worried about critical race theory, and they had a town meeting about it, and the school board was wanting to do all these sort of things. And so I sat with her and I talked with her for 30 minutes and just sort of shared my information, shared my take on it. And you could just tell she was just relieved to hear somebody say like, oh, you mean I don't have to just accept this? I don't have to accept the terms or be called a bigot. I mean, it was really an eye-opening experience for me. I gave her hope in a weird sort of way because, I'm pretty based about all this stuff. Like, I think it's a problem. I think it's bad. You and I have these conversations and we feel even kind of bad right now having this one where we're saying this is bad, this is bad. I don't say this with any kind of glee, but I know that you have to first be able to sort of see it and analyze it and see what it is in order. And I think even in that, it gives people some kind of hope. I really hope so.
Yeah. I mean, to me, and I've said this before, that the worst thing is this enforced cheerfulness. This
winsome, yay.
Yeah. I mean, we see it among a lot of Christians I've known over the years. They want to throw their kids back into the cesspool.
Salt and light, Rod. Let's just be salt and light.
Thank you. I just think they need to be salt and light.
It's like you're salting your children and barbecuing them
and lighting them on fire
up for the devils that would eat them.
Yeah, but and for me, it's, I think I might have said this when I got back from Romania on the podcast we did, that 400 people or 500 people came out to hear me talk. And the thing that some of them came from like 12 hours across the country. And they said the thing that they came to hear was they just wanted the reassurance that they weren't crazy and they weren't alone. In other words,
yeah.
and
That's right.
me,
That's right. That's right. That's right.
and that's the thing that I think that this is the hope part of it, is that we let people know that, you know what, you're not the only one seeing this.
Yeah. Yeah.
We see this, and we'll stand with you in some way. And Czesław Miłosz, and I see we're running out of time here, so I'll be quick. Czesław Miłosz, the Polish poet and dissident, in his book, The Captive Mind, came out in 1953. He was explaining how intellectuals give themselves over to totalitarianism, to communism in particular. He was talking about how people they take what he calls the pill of Murty Bing. It's a literary reference, but it's a great metaphor. He said it's a thing they take to make themselves capable of living with the insane, the morally insane. It makes them feel like, no, this is inevitable. Everything's good. It's all good. Well, a lot of people, even conservatives, are taking the pill of Murty Bing right now in our situation to help themselves be chill with the fact that we're tearing our damn civilization apart, to help them live with the fact that we are now mainstreaming in American media and academic discourse race hatred.
And look, this is why, as much as I love some of our friends, on the right, sort of more establishment figures, I know, somebody like Ross has a hope, I think, as I do too, even though I don't think it's going to happen, but has a hope that the institutions, the liberal institutions, will be able to absorb and neuter these forces of wokeness. And I think you and I are pretty skeptical about that.
Yeah, because these things are touching on some very, very deep passions in people, and the desire to hate the other is so deep in humanity. And Christianity at its best, as a social philosophy, has forced people to think back on their own sins. You know how it is at Easter when you go to Mass, and then we have the crucify him, how people in the congregation are supposed to say it. So we remember we have it within ourselves, the capacity to kill God. And
so true.
And Christians have done a bad job over the centuries in living up to that fully. But that is the ideal, and that is the thing we always have to call ourselves back to. What's happening now is this phony Christianity, this that substitute Christianity. And I'm not talking about what's preached in churches, though it could entail that. I'm talking about this philosophy that says, in order to defend the weak and restore justice, then we have to renounce the idea that all of us have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, that all of us have the power to do evil, and say, actually, no, it's just them.
Yeah.
I remember Spike Lee back in the 80s, or maybe it was the early 90s, whenever Do the Right Thing came out. Spike Lee gave an interview.
80s.
Yeah, Spike Lee gave an interview in which he said, Black people can't be racist. That's on them. Well, that was the manifestation of a theory then current, saying that racism is racial hatred plus power.
Yeah.
Right. And which is incredibly self-justifying, because you're, from a Christian point of view, you may be powerless, but if you hate your brother, you're guilty of sin.
Yeah.
And
well, and you're right, and this is why you watch the great next sacrificial victim will be Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King will get unpersoned very soon here, because he simply, everything he stood for publicly is no longer viable in the public square. Because he was tapping into a much larger tradition, a much more ancient tradition, and I think we're living in that. What Spike Lee just said, I think that it's a power-oriented game, and anyway, I do think that it is important that that those people who watch our show, I mean, honestly, we believe that civilization is a net good. And it allows us to live together, and allows us to experience fellowship and art and all those things that we want to be able to do. That's what civilization affords us, that opportunity. And if we're not busy building up civilization, then you have to ask yourself the question, what are you doing?
Well, and to kind of come full circle, I saw last week that Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter, the two great Black intellectuals, in their weekly, I think it's a weekly podcast, Glenn Lowry said, God help us if white people start thinking in terms of identity politics, because white people are still the majority in this country. And if they start thinking in the same way that these neo-racists of the left have encouraged Black people to do and are teaching white people to do in terms of condemning them by their whiteness, for their whiteness, if they go there and the whites turn to racial consciousness the way it's now popular for non-white minorities to do, we are in serious trouble in this country. And that is one thing that weighs on my mind heavily.
I agree, and I think that, even though, being pro-civilization, which you and I believe requires you to have a deep respect for our fallen human nature, right? Mm-hmm. It makes you weird in our current world right now, but it's important, right? I mean, you and I have said this before, like, be weird. Don't be afraid to be weird. It's really important right now because I think civilization is at stake. But look, we've got great resources at our disposal. I mean, we've got an amazing tradition, a tradition that has the ability to self-critique it, to critique itself and to make things better and to explain these things and illuminate these things. So I'm not without hope. I'm not without hope at all. I think that, but we have to band together. I think we have to mount a full-throated defense of civilization. So, look, just on a housekeeping note, folks, if you could do me and Rod a favor by liking and subscribing this podcast and sharing it with your friends. We'd really appreciate it. We'd like to get this out to as many people as possible. So please like and subscribe. And Rod, why don't you send us out?
Don't get nothing on you.